Mohammed, I want to get your take on what's going on overseas, and particularly the ongoing conflict in Syria. And I just want to read back for our audience an article that you wrote recently, just a few days ago, that appeared in The Atlantic, where you talked about the UK Parliament rejection of action in Syria. You said it confirmed a phenomenon that has been clear in economics and finance for a while. Countries are turning more insular, even when there are good reasons to believe that collective international action would dominate individual domestic responses. So this was very key for you, the UK rejecting a military strike in Syria.
Yes, it speaks to a more divided world, what Ian Bremmer called more like a G0 world, where it's very difficult to get everybody to agree. Now, in markets, why do we care about this? Because there are certain collective issues. So supervision and regulation, which is an emphasis of lots of countries, is not being pursued in a coordinated enough fashion. So you get different domestic approaches. Some problems, like the spillover effect of monetary policy, are either denied or not handled well enough. So when you look around, what you realize it's just much harder these days to get a global response. It's much harder to get shared responsibility.
Well, and in terms of a global response, I mean, you could just look to the Fed as an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Fed holds the view that it is pursuing domestic objectives using domestic tools, just like the Bank of Japan said it is. However, the spillover effects on other countries has been significant, both when they started the unconventional policies and now that they're starting to talk about taper. So I think there's a need, and the IMF is very well suited to do that. There's a need for someone to look at the whole picture,
right,
the whole global picture, and sort of give that perspective.
And yet, Mohammed, at the G20 meeting, which is going on right now, in fact, the Russian President Vladimir Putin is speaking, you see very little of that cooperation. And in fact, it's been quite frosty between the U.S. and Russia and quite divisive in terms of what's been going on in the thinking on Syria.
Yes, and you've now moved to from what should happen to what's likely to happen. So what's likely to happen is it's going to be difficult to get global responses to most problems, and countries, individual countries, and the U.S. in particular, is going to face some really hard choices.
So what happens to international money then, Mohammed? Is it going to, well, where is it going to go?
So it's a more fragmented world. You know, remember also one thing when you ask the question about international money, which is a question really about the reserve currency, about the role of the U.S. in global financial markets, you cannot replace something with nothing.
Right.
So there's nothing to replace the U.S. right now. So we will continue to play the role of the provider of global public goods. It's just that it's going to be a less efficient global system. It's going to be a more fragmented global system.
But it's going to mean, though, Mohammed, that the more tensions we see, the more of this divisiveness, that money will continue to flow into the U.S. market.
It does, as long as we don't mess up. And I think this is a really important message to give to investors all around the world, which is that be careful and focus on the flows as well as the fundamentals. I think the lesson of the last few months, Betty, is that as important as fundamentals are, technicals are also very important, and investors should keep an eye on both. Certainly we are.